The rain hammered down on the quiet streets of Washington, D.C., turning the sidewalks into mirrors of neon light. Officer Ryan Hastings and his partner, Derek Malone, were parked near the corner of 14th and U Street, ostensibly on a routine patrol. But in truth, they had been tracking Janelle Harris for weeks. They claimed it was due to suspicious behavior, though neither could point to a single crime she had committed. Janelle, a striking woman in her early 30s, was known in her neighborhood for her calm demeanor and sharp wit. She walked quickly, her black coat soaked through, as if she could sense the storm closing in, not just the one outside, but the one they were trying to create for her. Ryan signaled to Malone, and they followed her at a distance, eyes narrowing, searching for the perfect excuse to make an arrest. They had fabricated reports, planted false surveillance logs, and even told the precinct that she had been involved in organized theft rings, none of which had any basis in reality. It was the kind of overreach they justified with the bland excuse that she didn't look like she belonged. They didn't know that Janelle Harris was far more dangerous in ways that mattered and far more powerful than they could imagine. Earlier that day, Janelle had been called in for what seemed like a routine briefing at Langley. Her role at the CIA was covert, the kind that required absolute secrecy. She had been tracking an international cybercrime syndicate attempting to infiltrate U.S. intelligence databases. Her work demanded precision, cunning, and an almost uncanny ability to blend in. To anyone else on the street, she appeared ordinary. To the officers tailing her, she was a threat. But in reality, the only threat in sight was the man. They were walking right into a storm they couldn't control. As Janelle crossed the street, a taxi splashed through a puddle, drenching her from head to toe. She didn't flinch, merely adjusting her glasses and keeping her stride steady. Hastings saw the perfect opening. "Stop her," he whispered, but Malone hesitated. He wasn't entirely comfortable fabricating charges, but the thrill of power had dulled his caution. "She's been running, Ryan." "That's suspicious enough," Malone muttered. They approached her, their badges flashing in the dim streetlights. "Ma'am, step aside." "You're being detained," Hastings barked. Janelle stopped immediately. Her eyes flicked toward them, calm but piercing. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice steady, measured. There was no panic, no hesitation, only the sharp clarity of someone trained to assess threats in milliseconds. Hastings stuttered, fumbling for a reason, finally muttering something about witness reports. Janelle's eyebrow arched. "You're inventing things?" she said, voice low, almost dangerous. Malone's face went pale. She could see through their lies like an X-ray. The situation escalated quickly. Hastings tried to handcuff her, but Janelle moved with fluid precision, stepping back and twisting her body in ways that made him stumble. "That's assault," Hastings shouted, though his words sounded hollow. Passers-by stopped, some filming with their phones, others staring in shock at the scene unfolding in front of them. Janelle didn't resist violently, but she didn't submit either. Her calm composure contrasted sharply with the officers' growing panic. Within minutes, more officers arrived, called in by Hastings under the guise of backup for a dangerous suspect. They surrounded Janelle, pushing her against a wall. She looked around once, assessing the crowd and the threats, and then spoke into her concealed earpiece. Subtle click sounded in her ear, the signal to her agency. Compromised. "Proceed as planned," she whispered. Inside, she was already calculating her next move. They thought they controlled the situation, but they had just triggered the chain of events that would unravel everything. By the time they hauled her into the squad car, Hastings felt a strange unease creeping into his mind. Janelle's calmness wasn't fear, it was control. He had no idea she could neutralize the situation without a single punch, a single warning. Yet he underestimated her in the way all arrogant men do. By the time she was booked at the precinct, the false charges were being processed, and the narrative of her suspicious behavior was already circulating internally. She was accused of obstruction, resisting arrest, and allegedly trying to flee from authorities. The precinct believed they were doing their job. But Janelle Harris was no ordinary woman, and the courthouse was about to become her battlefield. In the interrogation room, the lights harsh against the sterile walls, Janelle sat calmly, hands folded, letting the officers talk themselves into a frenzy. Hastings paced, Malone scribbled notes that didn't make sense, and outside, detectives whispered about the perfect case they had on the record. Janelle finally spoke, her voice soft but commanding, the kind that made even hardened officers pause. "You've made a series of very serious mistakes," she said, "and you're about to find out why you don't fabricate evidence against people you don't understand." For the first time that day, Hastings felt real fear, not of the law, not of internal investigations, but of Janelle herself. He couldn't see it yet, but the tide had turned. The courtroom would reveal truths they had no idea existed. Secrets so explosive they would shake the foundations of their careers, and perhaps the very system they thought protected them. The courthouse loomed like a cathedral of justice, its steps slick with rain and frost. Inside, Janelle Harris walked with quiet confidence, her heels clicking against polished marble, each sound echoing like a countdown to reckoning. Hastings and Malone, now escorted in behind her, tried to maintain a semblance of authority, but the earlier unease lingered. They had successfully orchestrated her arrest on fabricated charges, but neither could shake the feeling that the walls themselves were watching, that the woman in question was already 3 moves ahead. Inside the courtroom, the judge, An elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses peered over his bench, expecting the usual shuffle of paperwork and perfunctory proceedings. The prosecution, handpicked by Hastings under the assumption that the case was airtight, had prepared a tidy stack of lies, reports, and fabricated witness statements. The press had been tipped off about a high-profile obstruction case, and a few reporters lingered in the back, cameras at the ready, though none suspected that the headline they would write would backfire catastrophically. Janelle's attorney arrived, a quiet, composed man named Victor Crane, whose reputation in federal court was nearly unmatched. He glanced at her once, noting the slight curve of her lips, the calm intelligence in her eyes. There was no panic, no desperation, just absolute control. He had been briefed, of course, but even he seemed to sense that this case was unlike any other he had handled. He whispered, "Ready when you are." Janelle simply nodded, her gaze never leaving Hastings, who fidgeted nervously across the room. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Hastings stepped up to the witness stand, his chest tight, rehearsed lies already forming in his mind. "I observed Ms. Harris engaging in suspicious activity," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "She appeared to be evading officers and obstructing justice." He glanced at Malone, who nodded tensely, sweating under the gaze of both the jury and the judge. They had convinced themselves that the evidence, though fabricated, was enough to secure a conviction. Janelle rose when her turn came, her steps measured, her presence commanding. The room seemed to bend toward her. Even the gavel's echo could not overpower the authority in her voice. "I am here today," she began, "to address accusations that are entirely fabricated. Not a single claim against me is truthful." Her words were precise, each syllable weighted with authority. She outlined her actions from that day, her movements and her precise location, citing security camera footage, timestamps, and the inconsistencies in Hastings and Malone's reports. The courtroom began to murmur. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the unraveling of a story that had promised scandal but was rapidly becoming a spectacle of deception exposed. Victor Crane stepped in, guiding the narrative. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the officers deliberately falsified documents, manipulated surveillance logs, and coerced witnesses to fabricate testimony. Ms. Harris, in fact, was performing her duties as a government operative covertly, yes, but in full legal compliance and national interest. He produced a secure dossier, sealed with CIA insignia, which the judge inspected carefully." The room fell silent. The officer's confidence began to crack. Malone shifted uncomfortably. Hastings' face grew red with panic as whispers spread that their careers could be in immediate jeopardy. The moment Janelle revealed her CIA status, The courtroom collectively inhaled. It wasn't just the lie they had told that was exposed, was the scale of their audacity. Their fabricated evidence suddenly appeared grotesque in its pettiness, their intentions clear and damning. Janelle remained calm, eyes steady on Hastings. "You assumed I was vulnerable," she said softly, almost conversationally. "You assumed my life was ordinary. You were wrong, and because of your recklessness, the truth will be made public in full." The prosecuting attorney tried to intervene, claiming national security might be compromised, but Janelle anticipated this. She presented declassified evidence that confirmed her actions were sanctioned, her operations legitimate, and her authority above their petty jurisdiction. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. Her intelligence did the work for her. The jury's expressions shifted from curiosity to astonishment, and by the time she finished, the weight of the officer's lies had become undeniable. Hastings tried to maintain composure. This is impossible," he stammered, glaring at Janelle. "You can't," just his words trailed off as the judge raised his hand. "Officer Hastings, Officer Malone, you stand accused of perjury, falsifying reports, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against Ms. Harris is invalidated in full. This court will proceed accordingly." The words landed like thunder. Malone's knees nearly buckled, and Hastings' hands shook violently as he realized the magnitude of the trap they had walked into. The courtroom itself seemed to hum with the shock of revelation. Janelle didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The law and truth were doing it for her. And in the quiet intensity of the courtroom, it became clear that the day's events were more than vindication. They were a demonstration of power. She had turned what should have been a nightmare into a display of unassailable authority. The courtroom had fallen into a stunned silence. Even the reporters, who had expected a simple, suspicious behavior case, now struggled to contain their astonishment. Janelle Harris remained seated, poised, her fingers lightly interlaced on the table before her. Hastings and Malone were still reeling, their faces pale, their earlier confidence crumbling into panic. Every eye in the room seemed to grasp the severity of the officer's misjudgment. They hadn't just tried to frame an innocent woman. They had targeted a covert CIA operative, someone trained to observe, calculate, and counter threats on a level far beyond ordinary law enforcement. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing the dossier Janelle had presented. "Ms. Harris, for clarity," he said, "your actions that day were entirely within the scope of your duties, and the evidence provided by the officers is demonstrably false." Janelle nodded, her expression unyielding. "Yes, Your Honor, every claim they made is either fabricated, exaggerated, or intentionally misleading. I was performing a sanctioned operation, one that required discretion, timing, and precision. Their attempt to interfere not only undermines the law, but endangered national security. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Hastings opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Malone fidgeted, his hands shaking as he realized that their actions might lead not only to criminal charges, but to permanent career ruin. They had thought Janelle was just a civilian, another ordinary person they could manipulate and intimidate. Instead, they had ensnared themselves in a trap of their own making. The very institutions they had trusted to protect them now scrutinized their every move with suspicion and growing outrage. Victor Crane, Janelle's attorney, motioned toward the evidence table. Your Honor, the court has before it a complete record of the officers' fabricated reports, witness tampering attempts, and inconsistent statements. In addition, Ms. Harris has provided official CIA documentation confirming the legality of her actions and her clearance to conduct covert surveillance. The discrepancies are not minor. They constitute deliberate perjury and obstruction of justice. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. We request that the officers be held accountable for these actions and that Ms. Harris be exonerated in full. The judge nodded solemnly. This court takes allegations of fabricated evidence very seriously. Officer Hastings, Officer Malone, you are both aware that submitting false reports and perjury carry serious legal consequences. The evidence presented here suggests an abuse of power and deliberate misconduct. Hastings swallowed hard, his mind racing for an excuse, but none came. Malone's gaze fell to the floor, guilt and fear written across his features. Janelle leaned forward slightly, her voice low but commanding. Your Honor, while I am exonerated, the officers' actions were not only illegal but dangerous. Their behavior could have compromised sensitive operations, endangered lives, and undermined the integrity of law enforcement. It is crucial that justice be served not just for me, but for the system they swore to uphold. She sat back, her calm yet powerful presence filling the room, leaving no doubt that she had already calculated every possible outcome of this confrontation. As the proceedings continued, the court's stenographer typed furiously, documenting the unraveling of the officers' lies. Reports that had been filed with the police department were called into question, and higher authorities began to take immediate notice. The federal prosecutors, initially confident in the case against Janelle, now scrambled to reassess their position. Hastings and Malone's supervisors exchanged anxious glances, realizing that their officers' recklessness could ripple through the entire department. Outside the courthouse, word had begun to spread. Social media lit up with speculation about a CIA agent framed by police and mainstream media outlets scrambled to verify the story. By mid-afternoon, the news cycle had shifted dramatically, turning a routine, fabricated arrest into a national scandal. Editors debated headlines, photographers jostled for angles, and journalists called an expert to explain how a civilian could be cleared of false charges so decisively. The public, once unaware, now demanded accountability. Inside the courtroom, Janelle maintained her composure, answering every question with precision. She provided clear timelines, corroborated with time-stamped digital records, surveillance footage, and official CIA documentation. Each piece of evidence dismantled the officers' narrative, leaving them increasingly desperate. By the time the judge prepared to issue his ruling, it was clear that Hastings and Malone had overplayed their hand and underestimated not just Janelle's skill, but her resolve. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds Ms. Janelle Harris completely exonerated of all charges. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the deliberate and malicious misconduct of officers Ryan Hastings and Derek Malone. Their actions constitute perjury, falsification of evidence, and abuse of authority. Appropriate legal proceedings will be initiated against them immediately. The gavel came down, its sharp sound resonating like a hammer striking truth against lies. Hastings sank into his chair, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. Malone buried his face in his hands, unable to comprehend the consequences. Janelle rose, calm and unshaken, and adjusted her coat. She had won not with violence, but with intellect, precision, and the unyielding authority of truth. In that moment, the courtroom became more than a place of law. It was a stage on which arrogance and deception were exposed, leaving only clarity, justice, and the quiet, undeniable power of a woman who had been underestimated far too long.